Hear ye, hear ye. The Honorable Chief Justice and Justices of the Supreme Court of the State of Michigan. All persons having business with this honorable court are admonished to draw nigh and give their attention, for the court is now sitting in special session. God save the United States and the State of Michigan and this honorable court. Well, welcome. It's my privilege on behalf of my colleagues to welcome each and every one of you here this afternoon to receive the portrait of our former colleague, my good friend, Chief Justice Clifford W. Taylor, who for many years sat in this very courtroom and for the end of his term presided here. For those of you who have never been to a portrait unveiling, it is the moral equivalent of a wake without a body. And we are all happy to have Cliff with us again. We are happy to see the presentment of the artists' arts rather than the embalmers. I have been placed on a great deal of restraint. You can't possibly know, having been on the receiving end of his barbed and rapier wit, how much restraint it takes for me with an audience present and him in the well of the court not to return fire. But we are pleased to have you back here, and we will all enjoy seeing just how well Patricia Burnett worked up your portrait to disguise the depredations of age. Now, this proceeding is not only being memorialized for future memorialization in a future volume of the Michigan Reports, it's being recorded on MGTV, Michigan Government TV. So again, I'm admonishing all of you. I obviously haven't been quite as punctilious about this, but we let you know that this is a public occasion. The roast will be later. The first of our speakers today is none other than our own Wallace D. Riley, who is the president of the Michigan Supreme Court Historical Society, to tell you about that wonderful organization.
Thank you, Mr. Chief Justice. I didn't bring my weight speeds up, sorry. Mr. Chief Justice, Associate Justices, Justice Taylor, distinguished judges in the audience, Taylor family and friends. On behalf of the Board of Directors of the Michigan Supreme Court Historical Society and all of its members, I want to thank the court for the opportunity to appear and participate in today's special session, which will in fact be a part of the Michigan Reports. Many of you here today are familiar with the work of the Society because you are its members. But for those of you in the audience who are not familiar, allow me to say that the Society was organized in 1988 to preserve documents, records, and memorabilia of the Michigan Supreme Court, and to promote education and awareness of the historical significance of our court. One of the most important ongoing functions is the maintenance of the court's historical portrait collection. The Society is the caretaker for 87 portraits, all relating to the court. This number includes individual portraits of the majority of the justices who have sat on this court. The history of how this collection came to be bears some retelling. Society began its activities 23 years ago by making a search for and bringing together all of the historic paintings. Many of the portraits of early justices were in fact almost non-existent. For all purposes, they should have been shoved into closets, packed away in dusty storage areas. Some of them were quite badly damaged and nearly unrecognizable. portrait of Nathan Bacon, for example, has been shredded in several dozen places. And one thought was that the society should find these portraits and professionally restore them and categorize them and catalog them with the Congress of the United States, the Library of Congress. You can view some of the portraits by simply going out in the hallways in this building. They're hanging here. You can view all of them and the details about the images and the people in the portraits by going to our website, www.micourthistory.org. Even today, we continue to work with art conservationists to protect and care for these historical treasures. Each year, we inventory the collection to inspect the portraits for damage, and we use the funds raised from our members by dues to restore the portraits to their original luster. However, our being here today brings to mind another important function in society, and that is to make presentations of newly painted portraits to the court. Since 1988, the Society has been privileged to participate and to bring to the court 17 such portraits in special sessions of the court. Today, the likenesses of Justice Taylor, the 100th Justice to serve on the court, will join the likenesses of G. Minnie Williams, Robert Griffin, James Brickley, Mary Coleman, Blair Moody Jr., John Fitzgerald, Charles Levin, Patricia Boyle, James Ryan, Thomas Giles Kavanaugh, and so many, many more. They illustrate how profound, and in a profound way, the history of the Michigan Supreme Court. Finally, may it please the court, I choose to offer an observation more personal. You may have noticed that in the list of names of justices, the name of Dr. Comstock Riley was omitted. Her portrait hangs just outside this courtroom. It was presented in 1997, shortly after she was diagnosed with Parkinson's and chose to resign from the court. Governor Engler appointed Judge Clifford Taylor to a remaining 2-year term. For the record, you should know that she took great comfort in his selection of her successor. 9 years earlier, in 1988, when she was serving as Chief Justice, she founded the Michigan Supreme Court Historical Society to record and preserve court history. Today, we close another memorable chapter in that history with a presentation of the portrait of the Honorable Clifford W. Taylor.
Thank you. Now we begin the more serious part of the personal business of recognizing and recalling the Chief Justice. And the first in that pantheon of speakers is our U.S. Secretary of Energy and former Senator, Honorable Spencer Abraham.
May it please the court, justices, Mr. Chief Justice, friends.
You've been in court before.
Actually, no.
You're doing well.
I always thought I would be dragged here, but something as positive as this. But in any event, it's good to be here today. For me, this is a somewhat ironic situation in that this event is taking place on September the 14th, and that just happens to be the birthday of my mother, who many of you knew, was a friend of a lot of people in this room, and who was, of course, a great political activist here in Michigan. And it was actually my mother who first met Cliff Taylor. And I remember as a college student who loved politics, her coming home one day and saying, I just met this new young lawyer who's gotten active in the local Republican Party, and I think the two of you would really get along. You've got to meet. And she was right. For 40 years, our friendship has endured. It has endured many interesting and challenging experiences together. political victories and defeats, perhaps a few too many of the latter. Cliff endured in 1974 when he had me manage his first race for public office, a great political public relations idea I had in which he spent an entire day being a working man working on a garbage truck in King County, Michigan, on the goal of getting great publicity as a guy that's a man of the people, except the press never showed up.
I bet the garbage did.
Not one of my favorite achievements in politics, but he endured it. And I've endured about 40 years of the sorts of comments and taunts that the Chief Justice referenced a few moments ago, most in good nature, but the disturbingly accurate observations about me that Cliff was so apt to bring up, but probably the most pointed of which, and correct I might add, was when he pointed out that the only elections he ever won were the ones that took place when I was safely ensconced in Washington. But through the wins and losses, through births and deaths, through geographic separation, our friendship has endured. And I consider it one of the really great gifts which my mother bestowed upon me. Today I'd like to talk about Cliff's career and his life on several levels. As a public man, as a private one, and as a friend. First, there is Justice Clifford Taylor, who headed our court and served with great distinction in this judicial system. I know that much will be said about what Cliff accomplished here and in his judicial career by future speakers today, so I will leave it to his colleagues to comment on those achievements. Instead, what I'd like to do is to just briefly discuss what I consider the broader impact that Justice Taylor has had on the law and on the jurisprudence of our times. When we began our friendship way back in 1971, we weren't just interested in becoming involved politically. I mean, that was maybe the fun part of it, but it wasn't the motive that got us interested and engaged. And more particularly, what we were motivated by was a desire to have an impact on the legal discourse in our country. It was a topic we talked a lot about. He had just arrived in this community as a prosecutor working for Prosecutor Scadeller, I think, at the time, and I was about to head off to law school myself. Now, it's hard to imagine two guys sitting at a restaurant in Lansing, Michigan, having this absurd notion that they could in some way have an impact on such a really large and important set of issues as the jurisprudence of their country. And yet, amazingly, in several ways, we did. When I went to law school at Harvard in 1975, I was fortunate enough to identify a group of other similar students in terms of political philosophy and legal philosophy. And collectively, we thought it might be a good idea to launch a publication in which we would present more traditional and conservative opinions on the law as a new type of law review. We launched that publication in 1977. It remains today one of the most widely read publications in the legal community, the Harvard Journal of Law and Public Policy. And it's actually thanks to Cliff's efforts, who helped us to raise the initial seed capital to get the publication launched, and who actually served as our first advisor to that publication, that we were able to get it started. And today, as I say, it has a subscriber list of over 10,000 nationwide, but even larger now, one of the largest distributed law reviews in America. And we thank you, Cliff, for having made that contribution. And that contribution actually then led, shortly thereafter, to the involvement of students at other law schools who found the journal an interesting forum and felt that they had an opportunity perhaps in their schools to do similar things, which ultimately in 1982 grew into the Federalist Society. And so from a sort of kernel of an idea here in Lansing in 1971, there emerged really, I think, a great legacy terms of what was achieved. Since then, in a variety of contexts, Cliff's countless appearances at seminars, at fora and conferences all over the country for 3 decades, debating and discussing not just the legal issues of the day, but the broader direction of the law in our society and the proper role of the judiciary and our separation of power system, I think has had a really profound influence in many quarters. And it is that impact that I think really is what we should recognize here today. As I said, I'll leave it to Cliff's colleagues to discuss his specific achievements here in this courtroom and our judicial system, but I think I can speak with some authority to the fact that his broader contributions have been extremely significant, and that he is viewed on a national level as having been one of the most relevant contributors of conservative intellectual leadership on issues relating to the law in our time. And Cliff, for that, I think you are owed a much broader debt from many of us. Then there's also the second person, Cliff Taylor, the private man, the one that a smaller number of us know. This is the man with the incredible sense of humor, mostly directed at people like the Chief Justice and the other select fortunate individuals. This is also the loving husband who is married to one of the most outstanding people I know, Lucille Taylor.
The smarter of the two.
In fact, as we commend Cliff for his contributions to our state today, I think it's really important that we acknowledge that there are very few people who have done more for Michigan as a public servant in their own right than Lucille Taylor. I remember when I was first getting to know Cliff and Lucille in the early 1970s, and constantly thinking to myself, how did he get her to marry him? And 40 years later, Lucille, I am still thinking. There's also the devoted father of Michael and John, who he loves so dearly, and who, in your absence, guys, he discusses in the most intimate and positive ways, and to whom he is totally devoted. He's also a man of unflinching loyalty to his friends and the things he believes in. And he is an incorruptible man whose integrity is and has always been unchallengeable, in my opinion. And finally, there is Cliff Taylor, my friend. This is the man who became a mentor and a friend to me as I was reaching maturity, and who helped guide me on a path that ultimately led to my own opportunities to serve in public service. So Cliff, my friend, I thank you for all of that, and to you and Lucille for the many great things you've done for me and my family over the years. Soon we will see Cliff's portrait. He is fortunate that the artist, the wonderful Patricia Hill Burnett, who's here today, has known him for many years, because of that I know that she has captured far more than the image of Justice Taylor. She has captured his texture, the various many layers I just talked about. As some of you know, as a former cabinet member, I too actually had my portrait done. This is the custom in Washington. This is a couple of years ago. Unfortunately, in my case, I had not previously met the artist before we began, and so unlike this case, he didn't know me personally. This approach actually has its advantages, because I was able to convince him that rather than capturing me as he was meeting me, he should in fact portray me the way I looked the day I took office. That was 6 years before, and he had no idea what that looked like. It allowed me to describe myself to him. So I described my earlier self, thinner, square-jawed, no gray hair, etc. And he did a fantastic job. In fact, half the room thought he had brought the wrong portrait. But what I gained in terms of cosmetic enhancement, I lost in terms, perhaps, a little bit of substance. But that will not be the case here today. Because today we will see the portrait of Cliff Taylor, a portrait that will capture the substance of a great man, a strong yet compassionate man, intelligent yet understanding, and faithful always to his God, his state, and his country. Cliff, congratulations.
Thank you. And now I am pleased to call to the podium my former colleague, the current Director of the Department of Human Services, who is fondly known as the Director Whirling Dervish, Honorable Moradi Corrigan. And you are admonished to observe the length of time humans can go without relief.
May it please the court. Mr. Chief Justice, Justices of the Supreme Court, Chief Justice Taylor, and family and friends of Cliff Taylor, a moment of personal privilege to say how wonderful all you justices look. I've never sat on that side before. And I miss you. Thank you for the chance to share my admiration and love for my friend Cliff Taylor on this very special day in the history of the Michigan Supreme Court. Cliff, it doesn't seem possible that this day has arrived. It's been almost 20 years. It was a couple weeks in early March of 1992 when then Governor Engler appointed Cliff and me to the Michigan Court of Appeals. And I thank you, Governor, for changing the course of my life and of Cliff's life by those appointments. Cliff and I spent the next 16 years as colleagues on the Court of Appeals and on the Supreme Court. Early on in our career as judges, I was sitting next to Cliff one day at a judicial training seminar. And the goal of the training seminar was that we would learn to become better judges by exploring our personality traits. And I'm sitting next to Cliff, and I look over at Cliff's paper to see what he's written. And he wrote down the word to describe himself, dutiful. And I thought to myself, that was really an odd response for Cliff. I mean, why didn't he write down witty or analytical or intellectual? No, he wrote down dutiful. And I recognize, though, Cliff, that that was really an excellent description of yourself. 20 years later, you were steadfast in your work as a judge and a justice. Despite the frequent attacks that were lobbed your way, the relentless attacks lobbed your way, you persevered. You always understood the primacy of the oath that we took, and you honored that oath to support our Constitution and laws. Over the 20 years that Cliff and I have been friends, I came to appreciate the costs and the rewards of duty, both at work and at home. As many of you know, my late husband, Joe Grano, suffered for 13 years from a chronic, debilitating, and ultimately fatal illness. And that was a difficult journey for my family. One evening about 15 years ago, my then college-age daughter, Megan, had just broken up with her then boyfriend. And that night, she and I were having a heart discussion. It's the sort of discussion that you always remember with your children. Some stick in your head. And Megan asked me outright that night, "Mom, why do you stay with Dad?" And I told her what I learned, that for me, the most important thing in life was keeping my promises, and that I know that if our roles were reversed, that my husband would have done the same thing for me. Well, these observations about fidelity and commitment are characteristic of Cliff Taylor, I think, and how he conducts himself. He believes that keeping promises is paramount above all, and he has lived out his promise to the people of Michigan to the very best of his ability. He used his abundant gifts of mind and heart to decide every case in accordance with our Constitution and our laws. and he was brave and faithful when political expediency would have always been the easier course. I witnessed on a daily basis that Cliff Taylor has a firmly grounded and finely honed notion of what is good. He and I, of course, disagreed many times over the years about how cases should be decided, the cases that came before our court. But we shared a common commitment to fidelity to the principles enshrined in our Constitution, the very best framework for governance ever invented in the history of mankind. How privileged we all were, Cliff, to think together for all those years. Clifford Woodward Taylor has forever left his mark on the Michigan Supreme Court. We will always call the years of your tenure the Taylor Court. Your personal life is equally filled with integrity and purpose. Your marriage of more than 42 years to Lucille stands as testament to the rewards of commitment. I know there's obstacles when two highly gifted people are in a marriage, but you would never know that by watching Cliff and Lucille. So Cliff, I congratulate you, and I congratulate the people of Michigan and Governor Engler, because you allowed this legacy to be created. And as we unveil this portrait, the beautiful portrait by our wonderful and beautiful friend Patricia Hill Burnett, of our Supreme Court's 100th Justice, I say to you, Cliff, thank you for keeping your promises and for doing it for all of us. You have made us very proud. May God bless you, may God bless the people of Michigan, and God bless America. Thank you.
And it's my pleasure now to call to the podium General Bill Schuette, Michigan's Attorney General. It's your duty. Sorry, I couldn't help.
May it please the court. Justices, so nice to be in your company. Cliff, what a special day this is for you and your family, Lucille, over there, and family members, and so many friends. It's an honor for me to be here, and a privilege and an honor to be at this portrait presentation on a special day for Clifford W. Taylor, and to be in the company of so many judges, federal and state, General Kelly, seeing Mora and Spence and Wally, Bernie and Rocky, Governor Engler, who's batting cleanup this afternoon, and then your comments, Cliff. It's a special day indeed, and may I say that for some in the state of Michigan, and let me define that as some, a few misinformed, uninformed folks have been anxious to hang you for years. And now this day has finally come. We're hanging Cliff Taylor. But it is a special day for all of us here and your friends, which are many. Now we've touched on, and I'm sure Governor Engler will touch on it as well, but so many, when you think about Cliff Taylor, will use words like intellect, writing skill, adherence to the rule of law, your decisions. And I've liked all your decisions except the few times you've overruled me. But that aside, you could add literate, likable, well-informed, so many words, witty, erudite. All of those are true. But here's my takeaway in terms of your impact on the judiciary. When you think about it, in this Hall of Justice, there are 86 portraits. You will be the 87th. Some of these portraits actually are nicely done. Some may not, but these are all honorable individuals, deserving to occupy space in the Hall of Justice. But I've always felt that public service in the truest sense of the word, and the finest sense of the word, is not about going through the motions. Public service is not about enjoying the ride. Worse yet, it's not about consuming oxygen or just occupying an office. That's not what public service should be. And Cliff, to your credit, Cliff, you never have gone merely alone. You never consumed oxygen when you served, and you didn't just occupy space. On the contrary, you understood so importantly about the dignity of this office. You understood the importance of language. And words matter. And you understood, maybe most of all, that in a climate where some revisionists wish to alter statutes for their own political means and purposes, that the judiciary and the Supreme Court, most of all, plays critical importance in upholding and protecting and defending the Constitution of the United States and of the great state of Michigan. So, Cliff, the space that your portrait will occupy in this building, in the Michigan Hall of Justice, is of the highest distinction. And your portrait, because of what you did, elevates the stature of the Hall of Justice and all those who occupy space in the future to the highest levels. Thank you. Congratulations.
It is now my pleasure to welcome Dean Emeritus Bernard Dobransky, Professor of Law at Ave Maria Law School.
Sooner or later.
Take your time.
And please the court, Mr. Chief Justice, Associate Justices, including Associate Justice Brian Zara, who I had the pleasure of having as a student.
Was it a pleasure?
Judges, friends, Lucille. It's a privilege and honor to be asked to speak at this program honoring the former Chief Justice. And I'm really grateful for the opportunity to offer my reflections on his remarkable career. The state of Michigan has been blessed with a great tradition of Supreme Court justices. Thomas Cooley, of course, and his colleagues, Isaac Christensen, James Campbell, Benjamin Graves, the original Gang of Four. John Detmers, who should have been on the Supreme Court of the United States instead of William Brennan. G. Menon Soapy Williams, the legendary Michigan governor, who further distinguished himself first as a justice and then Chief Justice of this court. As an aside, I note that another distinguished justice of this court, Justice Michael Kavanaugh, who of course still serves, had the good fortune to serve with Soapy Williams. And finally, former Chief Justice Mark Corrigan, who we just heard from a few minutes ago. The man we honor today, former Chief Justice Clifford Taylor, not only belongs within this pantheon of judicial greats, but surely is ranked as one of the greatest. While on the court, Chief Justice Taylor was a profoundly learned, incredibly articulate, and fierce defender of the view that judges must interpret the law, whether they agree with it or not, and not make the law. It is wrong, as he forcefully and capably asserted, for judges at any time to twist and shape the law to conform to their personal views to what they perceive to be prevailing political winds. But I'm not here to speak about his tenure as justice, no matter how distinguished it was. Rather, I want to talk about Chief Justice Taylor from a different perspective, one most of you aren't familiar with, from the perspective of a legal educator. More specifically, from two perspectives. The first is as a law school dean. Now, as a dean, I traveled extensively, not only in the state of Michigan, but throughout the country, with numerous interactions with other deans, law school professors, judges, including those from other Supreme Courts, and lawyers. Throughout Justice Taylor's tenure on this court, I was repeatedly asked about the Michigan Supreme Court and how it had emerged, even in the minds of those who disagreed with the thrust of its jurisprudence. And those were mainly the law deans and professors. It had emerged as the most dynamic, innovative, in the best sense of the word, innovative, and intellectually coherent Supreme Courts in the 50 states. Perhaps the most common observation, again, even from those who disagreed with its court's direction, is that it was under Justice Taylor's leadership, because of the wisdom of Governor John Ankler, the best and most distinguished state Supreme Court in the country. The second perspective, and the more personal one, is that as a law professor colleague of now Professor Clifford Taylor. Shortly after he stepped down from the court, he asked me if there was a class or two he might teach at Ave Maria School of Law. The answer, of course, was yes. My colleagues and I warmly welcomed him, and also his wife, Lucille, to our faculty. Not surprisingly, his performance in the classroom and as a colleague was from the very beginning outstanding. His classes sparkled with excitement. They sparkle with excitement. They are intellectually demanding, and they are always sprinkled with his well-known wit, barbed or not. Usually barbed. On the other hand, they still aren't nearly as good as Lucille's classes. As I was preparing to come here today for today's event, I ran into one of my faculty colleagues. And after telling him why I was coming, he spontaneously described Cliff as the model for the ideal law professor. I think that's a phrase. Extremely bright, profoundly knowledgeable in the law, and deeply respected and admired by his students and his faculty colleagues. I can't think of a higher praise for a law professor. It's certainly one I can't improve upon, and I share it completely. I've known Cliff, as many of you here have, as a friend, as a lawyer, as a jurist, and as a law professor for over 20 years. What has always impressed me most about him is not only his obvious intelligence and great knowledge of the law, but more importantly, his sense of humor, his moral integrity, his forceful will for what is right and just, and his abundant courage, a virtue which Aristotle claimed is the greatest one. And all of these were done, I might add, with grace and with elegance. So I thank you for inviting me here today, and I thank you, Cliff, for what you've done for the jurisprudence of this great state, our country, and for what you're now doing for our law school. Thank you very much.
And now, it's my pleasure to welcome to the podium Clarence Posa, Jr., Principal Miller Canfield.
Mr. Chief Justice, Associate Justices, Justice Taylor, Lucille, honored judges, and guests, may it please the court. I stand in front of you touched and honored by Cliff's invite to me to speak to you on this very special day, the presentation of his portrait. I am humbled to be here to address this court and guests in this magnificent Hall of Justice, where issues are argued and debated at the highest level with civility in a Supreme Court that is among the most respected in States. A hall of justice that Justice Taylor, Governor Engler, and so many of you worked so hard to build and create. A hall of justice that, if it were situated in difficult parts of the world, would perhaps be a way that we could resolve differences and issues without violence, but through argument over law, human rights, and principles. I feel in many ways like a freshman lawyer arguing or standing before the court for the first time. But as I prepared these simple remarks, I kept thinking about Cliff Taylor, who is a beloved friend and whom I have known since the 1970s. Cliff and I go way back, trace ties to our beloved alma mater, mutual friends, political activities, and the law. And over all of these years, Cliff has been more than a beloved friend. He's a beloved friend whom I have admired in every way possible. His integrity, his honesty, his intellectual abilities, his civility, and as noted so often today, his wit and charm. A friend that I or others could talk to on any problem or issue where guidance was needed, and Cliff would be there to provide help and guidance in a warm, human way, and always found a light, even in the most difficult problems. Last year, I'm very delighted to say, our relationship was created, actually added a new dimension. Cliff joined all of us at Miller Canfield, and we now practice law together in our professional colleagues. We are blessed to have Cliff with us, all 500 of us at Miller Canfield, in our offices here in Michigan, China, Mexico, Poland, and in many states in the United States. We are blessed to have him here with us. We have been blessed also, and Cliff is part of a tradition, I think tradition is the right word, I'm not sure though, that has allowed us to be blessed by many others. Justice Markman came to Miller Canfield after he was United States Attorney and before he became a justice. Senator Robert Griffin joined us after he left the Senate and before he became a justice. Justice Conrad Mallett started with Miller Canfield and then came back to us after he left the Supreme Court. Senator and Secretary Abraham was with us before he was elected to the Senate. United States District Court Chief Judge Gerald Rosen was with us. And so we have been blessed by having so many wonderful, wonderful folks who have contributed so much to public life in our state and our nation to be with us at Miller Canfield. Cliff, however, is enriching us now in so many ways. Every day, he helps us, not only with clients, but on firm issues with his wisdom, his intellect, historical perspective. But he really contributes where the legal issue, the challenge is particularly thorny and difficult, and where those of us practicing can't see a light. Cliff finds a path and finds a light, even in the most difficult situations. All the while in a tense situation with wit and charm. And for that, we are so blessed at Miller Canfield to have that as part of our team now. To Lucille, I would be remiss if I did not thank you for sharing this very special man and this very beloved friend with us. We'd like a little more this time, if we could get it from you and the law school. Justice Taylor, congratulations on the presentation of your portrait and all that you have done for the people of the state of Michigan and for our country. Cliff, thank you for being such a dear friend for so long. It's just been great. I look forward to so many more years.
It's now my pleasure to welcome to the podium Honorable John M. Engler, former governor of Michigan. Your grass is getting a little long.
Mr. Chief Justice, Justices of the Court, Chief Justice Cliff Taylor, my great General Counsel Lucille Taylor, members of the Michigan Judiciary, lawyers, distinguished former members of the Engler administration, people of Michigan. Privileged to be back. I am delighted to be back in this building to have a program where the heading isn't fill in the blank versus Engler. Nice to be here to celebrate with Wally Riley, and I certainly want to join Wally with so many people who admire the work of the Michigan Supreme Court Historical Society for the great work that you've done. It really, it's been a labor of love, but it's also a labor that I think is very important, because I think remembering history, it matters. And what you've done for the judicial branch and for this esteemed body is really important. And, you, the many directors, you know, we won't always have Frank Kelly to provide the living history. You, like, fading away and commemorating all this, it's just terrific. And it's also a real privilege to be in this beautiful building, because Dorothy Riley, Jim Breckley, so many others, Cliff Taylor, members of this court, Mark Corrigan. There were many. Mike Cavanaugh was part of this in sort of standing together over the years to actually bring this dream into a reality, to have this beautiful structure completed, to close in the Capitol complex, to be able to look out the front window and look down through the mall and see the Capitol. It's a special building, and I think that we have a court that is worthy of such a grand building, and worthy of all of these portraits that will hang here and commemorate the history of the court. Today we gathered to honor our 100th justice, a justice that I was privileged to appoint, and as Wally mentioned so kindly in his remarks, to fill while tiny shoes, the very large footprints of Justice Dorothy Comstock Riley, who was truly one of our outstanding legal minds and great leaders of the judicial branch. So, and I thought, you know, when you think back to that time, and Dorothy had indicated that she was going to step down from the court, it was the first selection I was to make to the Supreme Court, the first of what later became 3 appointments to the court. And what goes into that selection of a justice or a judge? As a governor, I ended up being privileged to appoint literally hundreds of judges at the trial court level, appellate level, and the Supreme Court. And I have a public service career that began, as Spence talked about, his 40-year friendship with Clifford Taylor. I actually have a career that goes back, you know, that far, and plus a little bit now. But it started as a state representative serving in the minority, and then ended some 20 years later, the legislative portion at least, as leader of the majority party in the Senate. Those 20 years gave me a ringside seat in the legislative branch and a deep appreciation for the powers and the roles in each branch of our government constitutionally assigned. I certainly remember, on occasion, being frustrated at times by decisions that were taken in both the executive and the judicial branches. And, you know, when legislators get to be unhappy with the executive, we've got a lot of tools. We've got other new legislation that we can write and pass. You could have a veto override. You've got the appointment process. You've got a lot of tools. You've even got the budget when it comes to that. But when you're disagreeable or disagreeing with a judicial decision, what's the recourse? What do you do? And so by the time I became governor, I actually had a few definite views about the judicial branch, about how our Constitution assigned responsibilities and what qualities I thought were essential in being a good judge or justice. And certainly at the top of my list, given the years of experience in the legislature and then subsequently a number of years of experience in the executive branch, is that the judges are not legislators. Senator Schuette was a legislator, but he left that behind. He became Judge Schuette. Now he's over in the executive branch. He's kind of hit the cycle here. But in each of those branches, he had specific responsibilities that were his to perform, and others that more properly, I've always felt, were in the branch left behind. Judges certainly are not in charge of the executive branch, or justices as well. Justice Corrigan now is in charge of a big part of the executive branch, which he had to leave the court to do it. Would not have been appropriate to do it from here. I congratulate her for that. Justice Zara is especially happy about that. I'm very excited about your new role. Judges are, and Rocky mentioned this, but judges really are already mentioned this, that they are to interpret the law, not make the law. I've always felt that. And they're not to be a second chance legislative body. I always felt strongly it wasn't about trying to win in the legislature. You couldn't win there, then come here. Politics are pretty much part of every bit of American life these days, it seems. We had elections, special elections in the congressional districts in Nevada and New York yesterday. A few weeks ago, we had recall elections in Wisconsin. And, not very many months away, in 2012, there will be presidential, federal elections, state legislative elections here. And there'll be, yes, judicial elections in states like Michigan. And I think we should continue to judicial elections. And those kinds of campaigns at every level and different types of office, they do involve issues and debates. And some of these campaigns are done in an honorable way, others perhaps less so. But once the campaigns are over, campaigns ought to be over. We've seen in legislative branches and even in the executive, sometimes the campaigns become almost permanent. But where that can't be so is in the judiciary, because that's where the arbiters are. That's where the independent judicial branch has to be, and it seems to me that's key for a court. It's key for somebody who wants to serve on a court. And so it came to me in not only the appointment of Justice Taylor, but in other appointments that I was privileged to make, to look at these qualities and to think about this with a sense of philosophy about what might recommend someone, what might really qualify them. And I think it's been mentioned today that Cliff Taylor is a man of great integrity. And I think we need in our judicial offices across this country at every level men and women of great integrity. I think that's very important. I believe strongly that such men and women, part of integrity is a great and deep appreciation for the rule of law. It is absolutely the case that legislative bodies ebb and flow with the times, with the influences. There are many, and some of the influences are felt by some to be more desirable than others, but that's what the political process, the partisan process is. It's rough and tumble at times. And you do win, and you do lose. But I think the referee responsibility, if you will, of the independent judiciary is to call the balls and strikes fairly, not to rewrite the rule book. I think there was something else that was part of Cliff Taylor in particular that it would not have been necessarily easy to know in advance, but I came to appreciate this, and it was mentioned again by Bertie Dabrowski in his comments about his leadership in the law. But there's another aspect of that, and that's the leadership in the Michigan judicial system itself. And And this court is to be commended for what it has done, for what it's currently doing. Justice Young, the unanimous court, speaking out on some of these issues in a way that I think was most helpful, is most helpful to the debate going on in the state over acute budget problems and trying to look at judicial efficiency, judicial management. Again, I think that the Michigan Supreme Court has been a leader in taking on tough issues over a period of time. Justice Taylor, as Chief Justice, did that. Your court today is doing that as well. And then I think also there's another responsibility that is there, and I think, again, this court has made steps, and Justice Taylor, certainly as Chief Justice, was a leader, and continues to be a work in progress, but it's something that's important to every lawyer in the room, and that's the legal profession and its health. The health of the legal profession itself, the professionalism, and the leadership there, because I think just as governments sometimes look for lots of ways to be able to fund their operations, a surplus of lawyers may result in some lawyers cutting corners to try to fund their operations, and I think the Supreme Court is ultimately the body that has to take on the responsibility of upholding the integrity of the legal profession itself. And I think Justice Taylor, on so many of these important leadership tests, stood up, was counted, and performed in a remarkable fashion. And his portrait now will hang here forever, reminding us of him. And, I had many things to say, but Spence Abraham cut most of them out on the plains. You really can't go there. This is a formal session. It'll be written down, words that are memorialized forever, so they're gone. I do want to, though, as we think about this and what this sort of significant passage, rite of passage, if you will, as the portrait is hung. I mean, the last official Taylor Act that this court will deal with. In those reviews that were mentioned about Clifford and Lucille's teaching, I happen to have been privy to at least one student's review. It was reported to me, and I believe the source to be impeccable on this, that one of the students in Clifford Taylor's class, Lucille had only superlatives said about her, and the suggestions that she be cloned immediately to have her quality of instruction be in every classroom in the law school. But for Clifford, the reviews were solid for sure, good. But one student, in sort of complimenting him on the class, observed that, gosh, he's really old. I guess today we acknowledge he is finally of age. He really is old. We're going to hang his portrait. Clifford, congratulations on a stellar legal career in the private sector, an outstanding contribution to Michigan judicial history with your public service on the Court of Appeals and on the Supreme Court. And I am just proud to call you and Lucille and your family dear friends, and could not be more excited to be able to be in Michigan, to be in this Hall of Justice, to know that your portrait forever will hang here to memorialize what I think has been one of the most outstanding judicial careers that our state has been privileged to witness. Congratulations.
When you have a face like mine or Cliff's, it is inevitable that you'd want to turn to one of the 10 distinguished portrait artists in the country of the Council of Leading American Painters. And so it was that Cliff selected Patricia Burnett Hill Burnett to do her portrait. And we call upon you now to do the honors. Come to the podium and have your 2 cents.
Well, I have to say that, of course, my most important motto in life is never say no unless they ask you if you've had enough. So, yep. So I'm thrilled at the age of 91 to be invited to Lansing for this portrait dedication of Justice Clifford Taylor. So I just couldn't refuse coming here. So with all this wisdom sitting before me, I still want to share some of the wisdom I accumulated in 91 years. Here's some of my lifelines. A series of mottos that I've invented or collected over the years. For one thing, they've given me a balance in life more times than I hate to tell you that I needed. But first of all, trust your instincts. They're your right brain talking. Don't dwell on regrets. Don't cry, oh, this is for women, don't cry over anything that money can buy. Forgive your enemies, but never forget their names. And you keep your friends close and your enemies closer. And if you don't have any enemies, you haven't lived a very wide life, should I say. And my last one is rise above it all. So I want to leave you with one profound truth that transcends wealth, poverty, religion, and politics. Mark Twain said, "It all comes down to this. No matter how famous you are, no matter how many honors you achieve, money you earn, one thing and one thing alone will determine how many people come to your funeral, and that's the weather."
Now you have to do the unveiling now. You don't want to do the unveiling? Well, you had a great set of remarks. Can you help her?
Yeah, it's going to come.
Don't get ahead of me, Clifford. Don't get ahead of me now. As I indicated, Patricia is a very talented artist, able to take what God gave Cliff and improve on it a bit, I should think. Now, when Clifford, Chief Justice Taylor, usually rises to speak, it's after the tomatoes and the brickbats have ceased to rise in rebuttal. But today, it appears that the body is here at the wake and has only good things to say. Chief Justice Clifford Taylor. Excuse me, Clifford. Clifford, excuse me. It appears that you had good weather today.
Well, as at any wake, the honoree is the body, and they don't expect us to say anything too much. And I'm going to honor that today. Frank Kelly, who at one point had the good fortune to run against me for Attorney General, the only thing I recall that Frank ever said that was thoughtful and contemplative to me was, "Cliff, never be the only man standing between a crowd and an open bar." And I'm largely in that position now. Patricia is so charming. I had never had a portrait done before, of course. And so she had painted this wonderful picture of John's triplets. And so I asked her if she'd do this. And in the course of that, we got to know each other. And all of the charm and pleasantness that you saw today is the normal fare with Patricia Hill Burnett. I still recall her telling me at the time she showed me this wonderful painting, you know what the three worst words for a portraitist are? I said, well, who is that?
not been in regal isolation. This has been sitting in a hallway in our house and has been the subject of any of a number of irreverent comments. Very neighborhood party one evening, and one of the little boys from the neighborhood wandered in, and his mother said, "Do you know who that is?" She said, "I think it's Bill Clinton." I never told Patricia that. That would have really outdone her. My youngest son, John, had the best comment about it, which was, "You know, Dad, this is what you look like when we asked for the family car." Well, you know, one of the unheralded benefits of serving on this court is that you get to have a dress rehearsal for your funeral. Only it's slightly better because if the eulogists get too frisky, you've got your remaining years to get even. And I don't have too much to get even for. There's a real talent for fiction that was on display here, and I appreciate it. I will say one thing. I am somewhat unsettled about the fact that no one managed to recall my heroic naval career. But that would have taken more talent than these folks have, because it's not easy to weave a tapestry of heroism out of a career spent in the Caribbean. Now, I'd like to thank the court for taking time to go through this today and for the pleasant things that have been said here today. And I'm, of course, anticipating that Steve Markman will perform well in a few moments. So I appreciate what you're going to say too, Steve, although I do wish you'd stop writing. I want to thank the Supreme Court Historical Society. Wally and I and Dorothy and Lucille were friends for years and years. What Wally and Dorothy did with the Historical Society is really to, in many respects, instill a sense of patrimony into our state and the Supreme Court. And for this, Wally, you are to be greatly thanked. I want to also thank Colleen Perot, my sidekick through hundreds of political papers, and this one today, who has been the organizer at our end of this, and she really has been her usual self, which is, simply stated, the world's most capable person. I'd like to also thank Miller Canfield, Paddock & Stone, the law firm that I'm with, and they've been very generous with me. And you know, one of the things that I'm asked to do in this post is to sort of give people an idea about what might move this group. And generally, it's full of very long and elaborate words, but at the risk of giving up a trade secret, let me just sort of give you the idea of it. You got a case before this court, and it involves a statute or constitutional provision or a contract or a bill of lading. Parse it like a tedious grammarian, and then get a couple of unions to file amicus on your side, and you'll have a unanimous court. I want to thank Bertie Gransky, who came here to represent the law school and also as our long-term friend. Thank you, Bernie. I've enjoyed the time at the law school. I've enjoyed teaching. I haven't enjoyed it as much as Lucille has, but of course she's been getting these reviews that are more encouraging. Maura, thank you for being here. You're, as always, a great, loyal friend, and I appreciate all the kindnesses. And I look back on the years we spent together. Maura used to always say to me, I never quite knew what this meant, but she'd always say to me, you know, Cliff, we're going to live down the hall from each other in an old folks' home someday. And I always thought, well, gosh, that would be fun. I wonder why. Bill Schuette, who turned currently serves, of course, our Attorney General, is doing a wonderful job with that, and has been my friend in the world of politics for a long, long time. Thank you for coming, Bill, and I appreciate your kind and wonderful thoughts. Spencer behaved himself today. This was really a source of some consternation to me. He sent me an email suggesting 3 topics that he might be discussing. That took care of a couple evenings of sleep, and but I had every confidence in the end that Spencer would be kind and gentle, and he was, and thank you very much, sir. John Engler has been the friend of Lucille and me for 40 years. He's a wonderful guy, and I'm greatly honored to have had your appointment to this court and the Court of Appeals, and I'm pleased that you think that I have carried that responsibility well. Finally, I'd like to thank Lucille and my children and my family for being here and for all the help and support that they have been to me over the years. I've enjoyed my time as a judge. Actually, I've enjoyed my life quite a lot. I've enjoyed almost everything I've done in my life. I never had the sad circumstance of getting up and driving to work in the morning and not liking what I was going to do. And of all the things I did, I found the Supreme Court the most intellectually rewarding, and many, many of you were very instrumental in that, either by redirecting me, criticizing me, or by filing briefs that were on target and very thoughtful and helpful. And finally, my former colleagues, after all these years, 4 of you still survive. And I must say that as I look back on that time, candidly, I'm still dismayed that some of you couldn't figure out the wisdom of the positions I was advancing. But I look back on the fact that all of us did our best to serve what in the phrase of the old Michigan song, the goddess name of the seas. Thank you.
Thank you.
Now we've seen it, it appears that we have to accept it. Justice Markman, having gotten the short straw, is going to do that duty now. Justice Markman.
Thank you, Mr. Chief Justice. I am strategically positioned on this program where I now get to speak and Justice Taylor gets no further chance to speak, and I appreciate that position. It is an honor on behalf of the court, the Michigan Supreme Court, to accept this portrait of Justice Clifford Taylor. And no, it was not a 4-3 vote to accept the portrait. Patricia Hill Burnett has produced an outstanding portrait, and it will grace our Hall of Justice for as long as our Hall of Justice graces our capital city and our state. And I congratulate Ms. Burnett on behalf of the court for her artistry, and I congratulate Justice Taylor for having sat still long enough to allow Ms. Burnett to perform this artistry. There's really very little that I can add to the many accolades that have been directed toward Cliff Taylor this afternoon, but I thought hard about this, and I believe it's probably worth mentioning that he dresses very well, and he's generally a safe driver. You know, I thought about it, and I feel like these are very worthy attributes, and they shouldn't be overlooked in the midst of all the other laudatory things that we've heard about Cliff Taylor today. The legacy of any justice of this court is inevitably reflected best, I believe, in this series of books, Michigan Reports, in which our orders and opinions are permanently memorialized. The exercise of judgment on the part of the justice, the judicial principles, the craftsmanship, the persuasiveness of analysis, and the commitment to the great propositions of our constitutional system, the equal rule of law and the separation of powers, These are all on display in these volumes, and Justice Taylor's legacy speaks for itself and, of course, can be judged by any person who chooses to take these volumes off the shelf and peruse them. What, however, can't be so simply assessed are the deliberative processes by which Cliff Taylor came to reach his positions and to give meaning to the law. And as his colleague on this court for a decade, and as his friend for a quarter of a century before that, these deliberative processes will always most indelibly mark his work as a justice for me. And most of all, in this regard, I recall his remarkable and genuine open-mindedness to opposing positions and arguments, his willingness to adjust and even abandon established positions on the basis of discussion and back-and-forth debate, and certainly his intellectual curiosity and his interest in discussing and rediscussing our most difficult cases. There's never a moment at which Cliff Taylor was not prepared for as long as necessary to discuss how a case should fairly and properly be resolved. He was, of course, never willing to compromise as to his first principles. These were simply part of his DNA. But he was always prepared to accept that he might either be viewing a case or his principles from the wrong perspective, and he enjoyed nothing more than being persuaded by and persuading others through the give and take of legal argument. And there was no justice who was more resolute in recognizing that ours is a court of law and that its legal rules could not be properly articulated without careful consideration of their impact upon tomorrow's cases. I once described Cliff as the king of hypotheticals, wherein by the Socratic process of asking a series of questions about hypothetical future cases, each involving slightly different fact patterns, he encouraged me and his other colleagues to consider the impact of today's opinions and today's legal rules upon cases that might be filed tomorrow or the day after. To me, Cliff Taylor was the epitome of a judge fully and deeply engaged in his work, fully and deeply engaged in all that he did on cases great and small. And he brought to the court a unique blend of practical experience drawn from his 20 years of general practice in a small law firm in this community, combined with an extraordinarily sophisticated and consistent commitment to a judicial philosophy that had clearly animated, as Senator Abraham mentioned, his interest in judicial service, and that he believed was required by our constitutional heritage. Cliff's insights, both those drawn from his experiences at Denfield, Timmer, and Taylor, and those drawn from his studies and reflections concerning the nature of the judiciary, have been remarkably influential and often dispositive in resolving an uncountable number of cases in his more than 11 years on this court. I must also briefly mention Cliff Taylor's specific legacy as Chief Justice of this court for 4 years. He was the author of the procedure by which this court now hears a greater number of oral arguments from the parties each term, in which more parties get to speak directly to the court in their cases. At his initiative, the court embarked upon the most ambitious and comprehensive jury reform proposal in the country, recently enacting these into law. He exercised unusual leadership in his recognition of the increasingly limited budgetary resources that were available to the courts of this state, and he worked to accommodate these new fiscal realities without impairing the core mission of the judiciary. Working with Wally Riley and the Court Historical Society, he established the Advocate Society in an effort to enhance the caliber of appellate advocacy before this court. He introduced our Community Connections program, by which the court now on a regular basis each term hears oral arguments in communities across the state outside of Lansing and combines these arguments with related educational activities in the local school districts. And perhaps most importantly, on a day-by-day basis, Cliff Taylor supplied the leadership, honest and always incorruptible, and brought the maturity to this court, allowing it, I believe, to become the very best court that it could be. And in many ways, I believe, a very courageous court. You know, there's a time capsule that rests in our main lobby, and most of you, I think, have passed it when you came into this building. When it's finally opened on October 8th, 2102, only 91 years from now, and I'm very much looking forward to that occasion, I believe that the passage of time will have confirmed that Cliff Taylor was both a special justice and a special chief justice, an historically important and memorable justice, and I believe that the passage of time will have equally confirmed that Ms. Burnett's portrait is one for the ages. Thank you very much.
Well, Mr. Chief Justice, this has been a wonderful occasion for all of us to remember you and to reflect on your legacy, not only to this body, but to the state of Michigan. I'm glad you had a good day. Thank you all very much. We're adjourned.